Nothing for us without us. With good reason, we often hear this phrase from patient organizations and their communities. Rare patient organizations and the families they support are the experts. Their knowledge and experiences are the foundation for much important work. Listening to rare disease families is an important first step to understanding their journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Raring to Listen. My name is Patty Fritz, and I'm the head of UCB's U.S. Corporate Affairs. To honor and support families living with rare diseases, I am very proud to be kicking off this podcast series that aims to elevate the voice of the rare community. Families who are managing rare diseases like myasthenia gravis and rare epilepsies have unique challenges that only families who live with these diseases can truly understand. While we will never know what it's like to walk in their shoes, we want to make every effort to listen, learn, grow, and work with their communities to contribute in a meaningful way. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this journey. Now, to get us started, it's my pleasure to turn the podcast over to our guest moderator for today's episode of Raring to Listen.
This is Pam Eads, Senior Medical Outcomes Liaison for Epilepsy US, and you're listening to the UCB Rare Epilepsy podcast series, Raring to Listen. I'll be your host today as we talk with Veronica Hood and Karen Utley about the impact a rare epilepsy has on different domains, such as communication, behavior, sleep, seizures, and basic daily activities. When we talk about quality of life, what does that mean for these families? Many rare epilepsy families have a very different perspective of what normal is for their families. How does their sense of normal impact the support services that are developed for them? And can it potentially impact how outcomes are measured and or reported for different types of rare epilepsy research that are conducted? At UCB, we believe that patients and caregivers are the experts, so bringing them into the conversation early and often is critical to finding the right solutions to support their needs. So we are super excited to dive in to discuss this important topic. Let me first introduce Karen Utley, President and co-founder of the International Foundation for CDKL5 Research, or IFCR. On July 2, 2008, Karen's life took a major turn when she received a CDKL5 diagnosis for her daughter, Samantha, who had her first seizure at 10 weeks of age. As soon as Karen received Samantha's diagnosis, she knew she had to be proactive to help make a difference. As one of the founding board members and officer, volunteering gave Karen a sense of control in a situation that was outside of her control. She served as treasurer for IFCR for 8 years, and in 2017, transitioned to be the president. Karen also serves in leadership roles for the ELC, Epilepsy Leadership Council, and REN, Rare Epilepsy Network, and is active with rare disease organizations such as NORD, Global Genes, and Every Life Foundation. Karen earned her bachelor's degree in nursing and hopes to use her education and experience to improve the lives of those diagnosed with a CDKL5 disorder. Karen, welcome to Raring to Listen. We are so happy to have you here and appreciate you taking time to spend with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this today.
We're glad you're here, and there's so much to discuss. Can you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and Samantha? In particular, I'd love to hear more about your daily life living with CDKL5.
I'm mom to Samantha, my 17-year-old daughter with a CDD diagnosis, and I also have 2 adult daughters who are grown, married, and live on their own. All I ever wanted to be when I was a kid was a mom. That was my life goal. In fact, I had a 7th grade teacher ask each person in her class to stand up and say what they wanted to be when they grew up. And I said, I want to be a mom. And she said, let me make it clear. I'm talking about what you want to do for your career. And I said, well, I think being a mom is the best job in the world and the most important. So I want to be a mom. And fast forward to my adulthood, I had my first daughter, and it was confirmed I was right. Being a mom was the best job in the world. I also did bookkeeping and things for our family business, and I was able to take my kids with me, and that was great. And then along came this little bundle of joy named Samantha, and she catapulted me into a life I never expected to be in. Suddenly, I needed to be a researcher, a rare disease specialist, a nonprofit leader, a convener, a negotiator, and a community builder. Along the way, I decided to grab some medical credentials while I was at it, so I went to nursing school, and no one knew what that precious little girl was going to change and how she was going to rock my world. And Samantha, she is full of personality and sass. Being nonverbal has no equation with nothing to say. She has plenty to say. She's constantly showing us how smart she is and surprising us with her abilities. She's engaging and funny. On her good days and on a bad day, we may hear hollering all day long or crying or just extreme unhappiness. And we never know what those days are going to be like until the day gets here.
Thank you so much for sharing, Karen. As a mom myself, I can't imagine all that you've been through and all the hats that you've had to wear having a child with a CDKL5 diagnosis, in addition to the normal hats that mothers wear. We appreciate you sharing these experiences, everything that you've been through, and how your motherhood experience has been different from the norm and what you thought it was going to be when you first started out with your goal to be a mother.
It's for sure different than I thought. And I think sometimes when you look back, so if I look at my life as a mom with my older girls, there's a 10-year gap between Samantha and my other kids. So when I look back and compare, it's drastically different, right? It's drastically different.
Do you think what you and Samantha experience on a daily basis is typical for most of the families in the rare epilepsy community?
So I think many of our experiences are. Samantha is considered higher functioning for the CDKL5 diagnosis, but when you look at our daily picture, what does that mean? Well, basically it means she can walk. She has pretty good muscle tone. She can communicate some of her basic needs, but overall she's still completely dependent on me as a caregiver. Then there's other things I think that families face that we don't. For example, we don't have respiratory issues. So when you talk about the needs of a child that requires suctioning and oxygen, and then the entire level of complications that adds to daily outings or what have you, we don't experience those personally. But I'm super connected to the community and understand the complications that adds to daily life. But what we do experience is that 24/7 need for someone else to take care of every single need you have. Someone has to feed her, someone has to change her, or she might signal that she needs to use a restroom. She can use a communication switch for that, but she's dependent on you to get her there and to take care of all of the requirements for that. So I think in the respect of all of the activities of daily living that truly require 24/7 assistance, we have that experience as well.
Thank you for helping us understand these common experiences dealing with communication, activities of daily living, feeding, dressing, bathing, things that people don't always stop and think about what it takes to accomplish those tasks.
There's one other area that I think is really important for people to understand and consider, and that is behavioral challenges and aggression. That is not something I have firsthand experience with as far as the aggression, but I really have had to gain a new understanding for what behavioral challenges means. For me, initially, when someone would label something Samantha did as behavioral, I would kind of get irritated and think, this is not behavioral. She's not choosing to be this loud, or she's not choosing to have whatever the complication is for lack of communication or what have you. And then finally a clinician explained to me and said, I'm not meaning it's necessarily willful choice behavior, like a defiant behavior, but it's still a behavior and it's still something that causes complications to your daily abilities to function. And that was really helpful for me as a parent to be able to say, okay, wait, they're not trying to paint her as this kid who's misbehaving, right? It's really what are some of the behavioral things you deal with that make life challenging. Samantha's very loud at times, so we can never go to a movie theater. We cannot go to the symphony. We can't. There's things that are eliminated for us simply because her behavioral issues are not socially acceptable at those events, right? No one wants to pay for a symphony ticket and they can't hear because the kid in front of them is hollering. And then the aggression side, what happens when your child outgrows you and they don't have those inhibitions to not hit you or bite you or, for lack of a better term, in some ways attack you physically? And how do you stop that? How do you safely restrain them? How do you keep yourself safe when they really don't have a true understanding of what they're doing? It's not something you can necessarily correct through disciplinary measures, right? It's not the same, and it's very challenging to families like ours.
So, Karen, what about sleep? Obviously, a very important topic. Tell us what the community experience is with regards to sleep.
Sleep is an issue for many of our families. Our kids have sleep dysregulation. It's very common. For many years, this was a struggle for us, and Samantha was an all-night party queen. She could easily go 72 hours without sleep and still be like an Energizer bunny. Over a week's time, I had gotten, on average, 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night. That was it. And I slept through a 5-minute tonic-clonic seizure. I woke up that morning, I looked at her, and I saw petechia all over her face. So I knew that she had had a seizure. I immediately started crying. I went to my video footage of the night and found the episode, and it was a 5-minute tonic-clonic episode. And you could see me just sound asleep beside her while that was happening. And that is the day I called and said, we need an appointment because we have to do something about sleep. Sleep deprivation is used as a means of torture, right? Like it's really serious, and there's consequences to your own health, but also the danger I had to have kind of put in my face was when you're so tired, you're going to reach a point that you sleep no matter what's going on around you. And we were fortunate. Now Samantha sleeps very well, with the exception of 1 to 3 nights a month versus 3 to 4 nights a week, right? But other families aren't so fortunate. They don't seem to get relief. And many times these parents are functioning on 2 or 3 hours of sleep at a time, frequent night wakings, and they don't have any relief in sight. And it's truly terrible.
Oh, I can't even imagine how challenging that would be to be constantly sleep deprived and still be in this caregiver role and mother role. That's a lot on your plate. And I can imagine that these issues have taken a huge toll on you personally as well. And I'm thinking about, how do you cope? And are there resources to be able to help you and other families that are in the same situation?
I think finding your community, finding the other parents who can understand so you don't feel so alone and isolated is critically important. Also, our community is able to sometimes take advantage of programs that are considered like autism friendly. Even though Samantha doesn't have a diagnosis of autism, those types of inclusive events, whether it be a movie showing, right, where you can go and no one's going to be shocked if your child is yelling or loud, or those obvious behaviors that stick out so much in other environments. Taking advantage of things like that, and also giving yourself permission to make a decision on that particular day. That was one of the things I had to do. Like, Just be clear. If someone invites you to do something, saying, we would love to do that, but if it is a bad day, we may have to not. So if it's something where they require an answer, then maybe the answer has to be no because you're not dependable for that event. But I found once I started being really transparent with those challenges, I received a lot more grace and understanding.
That's really good advice. Thank you for sharing that. I want to transition to introduce our other guest, Veronica Hood, Scientific Director for the Dravet Syndrome Foundation, or DSF. Dr. Hood joined DSF in 2020. She has an MS in biology from East Tennessee State University and a PhD in cell, stem cell, and developmental biology from the University of Colorado. She spent 10 years in laboratory settings researching how small changes in genetic and molecular regulation contribute to complex neurological diseases. In 2007, Veronica had a son, Gabriel, who faced severe developmental challenges. Gabriel presented with initial seizure activity within his first 2 months of life, and his medical needs quickly became quite complex. Despite endless testing, a diagnosis remained elusive, and at age 8, sadly, Gabriel passed away. Veronica, it is inspiring that you've turned your personal loss into a positive force to help others.
It's just so meaningful to get to honor my son's memory and to utilize this really personal journey alongside my scientific training to try to help other families that are on a similar path now.
We really appreciate you making time for us today. Thank you, and welcome to Raring to Listen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today with you.
Veronica, we just heard from Karen on the different challenges she and Samantha face on a daily basis. We also heard about other insights from her community. As the scientific director for DSF, what goes through your mind when you think about research being developed to support families with loved ones diagnosed with rare epilepsies?
Yeah, I think Karen really highlighted so many of the points that I'm going to reemphasize here. Families caring for loved ones with a rare epilepsy diagnosis are shouldering just this tremendous burden, and it touches nearly every aspect of their life. And up till now, the majority of the focus when you're thinking about rare epilepsies is, are the seizures more frequent or are they less frequent? And just a focus on measuring seizures. And we've seen in recent years that research is really starting to try to understand more about what we're talking about here today. So these quality of life issues. And I think it's really complex. And I think Karen emphasized this. And I think I have an example. So taking off my scientific director hat and putting on my caregiver hat, there was this really defining moment for me in my journey with my son where I suddenly realized how far my acceptance of normal had shifted. And so my son was about 3 and he had a medical emergency in the middle of the night. We had nursing help, but it was a new nurse. And so I was woken up to the middle of the night with medical alarms going off and a nurse yelling for help. And so I went in and things were very, very critical in that moment, but we were able to stabilize him. The nurse was very shooken up, so we let her go home. And so needless to say, didn't get a lot of sleep that night, balancing things out. But the next morning I was in grad school. I was working in a laboratory and I got up and I went to work. And I just remember sitting with a coworker at lunch and casually mentioning how tired I was. And then I told her what had happened the night before. And as I'm just sort of telling this story, I was impacted emotionally, but this was a normal occurrence for me. So it was somewhat casual in recounting it. And I watched as my coworker, who had a child of a similar age, as her jaw dropped and her eyes widened and they filled with tears. And she looked at me and just said, "Why are you here today? Like, you should be home." And that sort of shocked me. And it was this moment of realizing that what I experienced on a normal basis is something that might be a once-in-a-lifetime event for someone with a typically developing child, having to do some sort of intervention to save their life. And it had become so commonplace to me. That was just such a poignant moment. And I think that is very indicative of what I see for families working with the Dravet syndrome community, that these types of scenarios, these very shifted norms, this need to be ready to respond to a life-threatening emergency at any moment, So the big things like that, but then also the simple things like Karen brought up, maybe not being able to go to the playground or go to a birthday party. And so these norms can be different for every family. They can also shift within a family. So what we were talking about with behaviors, parents might not be able to take a young child with Dravet syndrome to the park because they could have a seizure with the heat or the excitement. And maybe as they grow older, their seizures are a little bit better controlled and or the family is more adept at handling them. But now they can't go to that park or that party because the behaviors have become so difficult to manage. And so it's really critical that we get good at asking the right questions to understand what is important to that family and at that moment in time, and understanding what changes could make that quality of life better. And that may need really targeted questions because even as parents, we may not recognize how far from norm our quality of life bar has migrated.
It hit me when you said that this had become commonplace for you, when it really truly is unimaginable, for other people and for your coworker. She couldn't even imagine having a night like that. It's helpful to our listeners to be able to understand that perspective. So thank you for sharing that. You've both shared such personal and professional perspectives with us on the challenges of living with rare epilepsy. And after listening to your insights, it sounds like taking time to understand what normal means to families is key to understanding how to support and conduct research that may positively impact their lives. The unmet need in the community is clear and also complex. Given the many priorities and challenges that we discussed today, what is the most important insight from your experience thus far that you would like to pass along to our listeners?
I feel like I've learned so much on this journey that's really hard to narrow down. But I think one of the biggest things to me that I've learned through the years is just wanting to make sure that people see value in our community, that they understand that we are worthy of investments and efforts to develop treatments, that we are seen and understood. And like Veronica was mentioning, making sure you learn the true needs of the community, and those change according to age of child and different scenarios as these patients get older, and making sure that the efforts and the sacrifices required of these families are considered, making sure you understand what it takes for them to participate, whether it's, a research study or a trial, or even just what it takes for them to get their clinical care that's needed. All of those things require huge efforts from the families. And those asks that we place on these family members, making sure they're necessary, making sure that it's understood, that you understand their needs. And all of that can only be done through building a real relationship with the community, with a transparent and trust-based relationship. And then I think the resounding message I usually try to leave people with is, remember that people like Samantha, they are important people. They deserve a hello, a smile, some type of interaction that shows them you see them. And when you do that, you will receive some type of feedback or confirmation from that child, but also from the family. There is nothing better than feeling like my daughter was seen and acknowledged. And I feel like I hear that resoundingly from other families. So that's what I think the message I would leave people with for food for thought.
Thank you, Karen. Veronica?
Yeah, so I think as the scientific director for DSF, I have seen exemplified to me the amazing power of patient communities coming together and advocating. And sometimes advocacy also just means participating in research efforts. And so when we're talking about quality of life, a lot of this has to be based on caregiver and patient community and their participation. And so I guess my message to patient community is realize how important when you participate in research, realize how important your voice is, and that sometimes filling out a survey can trickle down into things that change the way clinical trials run. On the flip side, I will underline an exclamation point beside Karen's point that the burden on families is already so high. And so my message to researchers looking to help learn more about the patient community is to really think carefully in the design, be respectful of the time of the families that they're giving to help advance this research. Think carefully about the questions you're asking. Think carefully about what you hope to gain from a question. If you can't answer that clearly, don't ask a family to answer the question. And then show the community that you value their input by delivering back the results of your research back to them. And so certainly that means publishing and presenting at professional conferences, but it also means taking the time to ensure you have created content that is patient community facing. I think that's due diligence of researchers to be communicating those results broadly, especially to the people that have helped make that research possible.
So choosing the correct outcomes measure in clinical research is critically important. And one of the questions that I have is, do you think the right measures are being considered in clinical research for this population?
I would say not always. So when I think for the Dravet community about what's been used to measure changes in clinical trials, up till now, it's mostly, like I mentioned previously, focused on seizures. And we do see secondary outcome measures being added where they're trying to look at measures like quality of life that we've been discussing here today. The problem is that for some patients, this might be granular enough to show improvements, but for other patients, they might bottom out or even top out of scales. Or the measured improvements might be much smaller, much more granular than what these measures are really meant to be measuring, if that makes sense. And so we might miss meaningful improvements for families when we use these scales that look like nothing's changed, when really very meaningful things have changed for families. There are some existing scales right now that can be useful, like I said, for some subsets of the population or in certain domains that you're measuring, but there's not perfect scales that do this. And so there's lots of efforts within the rare disease community, within the rare epilepsy community, to develop more tailored outcome assessments that can get at some of these issues that we're talking about.
Small changes can make huge differences. So if you come up with something that changes something as small as a sleep pattern, which seems small on the broad scheme of things, but for a family or parents, it would change everything.
I like your idea of small changes. That makes a lot of sense, that very small changes can greatly increase the quality of life in the patient population.
And I believe IFCR has had a lot of involvement in this kind of work. So I'd be very curious to see, Karen, your thoughts on this as well.
Thanks, Veronica. We actually have. We've done some funding of initial development on a CDKL5 severity assessment scale that my hope is that possibly would be applicable across developmental epilepsies. One of the challenges in the CDKL5 space is what they call a floor effect, or like Veronica was mentioning, they don't even register on the existing scale. And so you have to find something that they can be measured on that pick up their abilities or different domains. And those are challenges that if we end up in a place, which hopefully we will, that we have disease-modifying treatments, we're going to have to be able to measure those changes to prove they're effective or prove they're not effective. If you're below the scale or below the floor of a scale on everything or at the top of everything, you can't show those changes. And it's really important to help support these types of efforts so that when we reach the time points that we need these types of measurements, we actually have them.
Thank you both, Karen and Veronica, for this insightful discussion. And you've given some excellent reasons why the acceptance of patients and families as equal partners in the clinical research and trial process is crucial going forward to better understand between patients and researchers that can lead to better outcomes and address patients' real unmet needs versus their perceived needs. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. Families living with CDKL5 deficiency disorder, Dravet syndrome, and other rare epilepsies are on a complex journey that impacts the entire family, and that's why connecting with patient organizations like IFCR and DSF are so important. It's also important for companies like UCB to listen and collaborate with these organizations and the families they serve, since they are the experts. We've done just that to address this topic we've been discussing today. We are pleased to be kicking off a new, short, 10-minute research survey that aims to better understand what quality of life means to caregivers. Please reach out to the Rare Epilepsy organization that supports your community to find out how you can participate.
Absolutely. DSF would love to help connect families to this survey, and I encourage families in our community and in the broader rare epilepsy community to participate in this effort.
What would be the best way for families to reach out to DSF?
They can find our website at dravetfoundation.org. They can email us at info@dravetfoundation.org, and they can also find us across all social media platforms.
And Karen, how do people find IFCR?
So we have a website, cdkl5.com, and then you can also reach us through email, ifcr@cdkl5.com.
Great, thank you. Karen and Veronica, we are so grateful to you for taking time to join us today and for sharing your experiences to help others in the rare epilepsy community. We sincerely appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
I'm Bipan Singh, Brandley Rare Syndromes. UCB cares about this topic because we recognize that caring for a loved one with a rare epilepsy impacts everyone in the family. Listening to the community, their challenges, and what's important to them is the only way to truly create a change. As scientific innovators and researchers, it's our duty to collaborate early and collaborate often. As supporters of the rare epilepsy communities, it's our goal to listen, understand, and collaborate on the ways that we can create a meaningful impact. We are raring to listen to you and to your stories, and we want you to know we hear you.
This is Pam Eads, and you've been listening to UCB's Raring to Listen podcast. Please join us for the next episode of Raring to Listen, which will focus on long-term adult care for individuals with rare epilepsy. This is a very complex topic that we will dive into with caregivers who understand what it's like to walk on this journey with you. Until next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by UCB, a global biopharmaceutical company committed to discovering and developing innovative medicines that transform the lives of people living with severe disease. For more information, please visit us at ucb.com.